Welcome to the Flag Bearer channel. This is Little Known Black History Facts. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Say their names. Women without sanctuary. As we come to the close of Women's History Month, we're going to highlight and say the names of a few black women whose lives were tragically taken due to the cruelty and racism of the times. Today we're going to say their names so that we can remember what was done to them and as a memorial that their lives were not lost in vain. These women's lives mattered at a time when hostile mobs took the lives of thousands of black men and women just because of the color of their skin. These people were without sanctuary in a country that promised freedom, but did not deliver for some. For generations of black women, racial terror included the constant threat of sexual assault and a complete lack of legal protection. The same communities that lynched and legally executed black men for the scarcest allegations of sexual contact with white women regularly tolerated and excused white men's sexual attacks against black women and girls. Given this history, many black women were targeted for sexual violence during this era by white men who knew that they would face no judgment or consequences for violating her or the community in which she lived. The first name we'll call out is Marie Scott. Marie Scott was a 17-year-old black teenage girl who lived in Wagner County, Oklahoma. In 1914, she was lynched by a white mob after she was brutally assaulted by 4 white men who broke into her home while she was preparing for the day. On March 31, 1914, 4 drunken white men decided to drive over to the black community of Wagner County, Oklahoma, with the intent of sexually assaulting black women. These men broke into the home of 17-year-old Marie Scott while she was undressing. They locked themselves in her room and proceeded to sexually assault her. Her brother apparently heard her screams for help and ran to help his sister. He grabbed a knife, kicked down the door, and killed one of the assailants. Marie stated that they fought off the 4 men with one man, Lemuel Pierce, being stabbed to death. She told her brother to run, and he did. Marie was arrested by the local sheriff and his deputies, with no arrest, indictment, or charges being brought against her attackers. An angry white mob became enraged when they couldn't find Marie's brother, so they dragged Marie by her hair, kicking and screaming from her jail cell, and hung this 17-year-old sexually assaulted child from a nearby telephone pole on March 31, 1914. Such was the life of the black woman during the Jim Crow era. Though she was no longer a chattel slave, her body and sexuality was still being used, abused, and discarded by the white man at his whim, and without any consequences. The Associated Press Wire report and accounts published by Northern papers explained that the group of white men had ventured into the black residential area solely for the purpose of assaulting black women. According to some of these accounts, Marie stabbed Pierce in self-defense. In others, Marie's brother killed Pierce in an effort to defend her, and Marie was only arrested and lynched because her brother escaped. Local press reports, on the other hand, didn't say anything about why the white men were in the black neighborhood or what they did while there, and simply claimed that Marie Scott stabbed Pierce unprovoked and in cold blood. Whether she acted in her own defense or was protected by her brother, Marie Scott died at the hands of a mob, the victim of a society that devalued her life and body, deprived her of the chance to defend herself at trial, and denied her the right to be free from rape, fear, and racial terror. Next, we'll call out the name Jennie Steers. On July 26, 1903, in Shreveport, Louisiana, Jennie Steers was charged with giving a poisoned glass of lemonade to a 16-year-old white teenager, Elizabeth Dolan. It is said that she fled from the scene as soon as the body was discovered. She was pursued by a posse who found her crouching in a hayloft. She refused to come out and had to be dragged from the place. She was taken to the Dolan homestead, where Jennie was identified as the woman who had placed the poison in the lemonade. An angry mob demanded her to confess. She refused, maintaining her innocence in the crime. Before she was killed, a mob took her to a tree, placed a rope around her neck, and again demanded a confession. Steers refused to confess and was hanged. While her body was still suspended in the air, bystanders fired several bullets into the hanging body, decimating the corpse. This was the first time that a black woman was ever lynched in Louisiana. Next, we'll call the name Laura Nelson, who was lynched on May 23, 1911, in Okemah, Oklahoma. Her 14-year-old son, LD, was also lynched at the same time. Authorities accused Laura of killing a deputy sheriff who supposedly stumbled on some stolen goods in her house. Why they lynched her child is a mystery. The mob raped and dragged Nelson 6 miles to the Canadian River and hanged her from a bridge. Austin Nelson had married Laura in 1896, and their son Lawrence, who they called LD, was born the following year. They had another child, an infant girl named Carrie. The Nelson family lived on a farm near Paden, Oklahoma, a largely white town. On May 1, 1911, Sheriff George Looney received a complaint of a stolen cow from Claude Luttrell's property in Paden. Luttrell obtained a search warrant that allowed him to search the Nelson farm. When meat allegedly from the stolen cow was found in the barn, the son LD grabbed a Winchester rifle hidden in a trunk, while Laura grabbed another gun. A gunfight began, resulting in the death of the sheriff. The Austins fled to a nearby relative's home, but were arrested later that day. Austin Nelson admitted to the theft of the steer, and his son LD later confessed to pulling the trigger that killed Sheriff Looney. Although the Nelsons hired lawyers to represent them, Austin pleaded guilty to larceny and was sentenced to 3 years in the Oklahoma State Penitentiary. Both Laura and her son LD were charged with murder, held on bail, while baby Carrie, Laura's child, was taken into custody and jailed with her mother. Laura and her son LD were set to be arraigned on May 25th, but at around midnight on May 24th, a mob of approximately 30 to 40 men arrived at the jail and caught the jailer off guard as he waited for an arriving detective. The mob bound, gagged, and blindfolded the jailer. They took his keys and dragged the Nelson family out. Laura and LD were dragged from their cells and put into wagons. The mob took them 6 miles outside of the city to a bridge over the North Canadian River. The men gagged and sexually assaulted Laura repeatedly while she held baby Carrie in her arms. Both Laura and her son LD were hung from the bridge, and LD was castrated. The following morning, the bodies were found hanging 20 feet below the middle span of the bridge by a young boy gathering water, but they were not cut down until later on. Crowds gathered to laugh and gawk at the hanging bodies. Then, they stood posing for pictures glorifying their horrendous deeds. Photographs were taken and later sold as postcards by photographer George Henry Farnham. A local woman picked up surviving baby Carrie from the ground where the mob had discarded her. The woman took the baby home and raised her. What happened to baby Carrie later in life is unknown. Perhaps her identity was changed in order to protect her. A grand jury investigation of the lynching of Laura and LD Nelson was convened on June 11, 1911, but no members of the mob were ever identified. The fourth name is Mary Turner. Mary Turner was a young woman whose 1918 lynching in Lowndes County, Georgia, prompted NAACP officials to ask Missouri Congressman Leonidas Dyer to craft the 1922 Dyer anti-lynching bill. The bill passed the U.S. House of Representatives, but never became the law of the land because it failed repeatedly in the U.S. Senate because of opposition from Southern Democratic senators. Mary and her husband Graham moved to Brooks County, Georgia, where they took jobs with plantation owner Hampton Smith. Smith was known for abusing and beating his workers and for bailing people out of jail and having them work off their debt in his fields. Mary Turner was once severely beaten by Smith. When her husband threatened him, local authorities sentenced him to time on a chain gang. On the evening of May 16, 1918, Hampton Smith was shot and killed by one of his workers. The following week, Brooks County saw a mob-driven manhunt which resulted in the lynching of 13 people, including some who were in the local jail. Mary Turner learned that her husband had been killed in the lynching rampage. 19 years old and 8 months pregnant Mary Turner publicly denied that her husband had anything to do with the murder of Hampton Smith. He had been arrested among others on the farm. Her remarks further enraged the locals, and the mob turned on her, determined to teach her a lesson. Her voice alone enraged the local men, and they came after her. Mary fled for her life and for the life of her unborn child, but was caught the next day. A mob of several hundred people dragged her to Folsom Bridge over the Little River, which separated Brooks and Lowndes counties. The mob tied her ankles, strung her upside down, doused her clothes in gasoline, and set her on fire. While she was still alive, someone split open her womb and her unborn baby slid to the ground. The mob stomped and crushed the baby to death. Turner's body was riddled with hundreds of bullets. Later that night, the remains of Turner and her baby were buried a few feet away from where they were murdered. 3 days later, the murderer of plantation owner Hampton Smith was caught and killed in a shootout with police. During the week-long rampage, more than 500 African Americans fled from Brooks and Lowndes counties in fear of their lives from the angry mobs. Although local officials were given names of instigators and 15 specific participants, no one was ever charged or convicted of the murders. A historical marker memorializing Turner was placed near the lynching site and dedicated on May 15, 2010. Lastly, we will call out the names Maggie and Alma Howse. Both were pregnant when accused of the murder of Dr. E. L. Johnson in December 1918. The local press described Johnson as being a wealthy dentist, but he did not have an established business in the true sense of the word. He sought out patients by riding his buggy throughout the community, offering his services to the public. Unable to make money peddling his dentistry services, he went to Mississippi to work on his father's land near Shibuya. During his travels, he had met and seduced Maggie Howse, a young black woman who he had asked to move in and work for him. He also asked that she bring her younger sister Alma along with her. While living in the doctor's home, he used both of the young women as sexual objects. Johnson impregnated both of them, even though he was married and had a child. There were 3 other black laborers who worked on Johnson's plantation, 2 of them who were brothers, Major and Andrew Clark. Major wanted to court Maggie, but Johnson violently opposed, threatening Clark's life. Shortly after, Johnson turned up dead, and the finger was pointed at Major Clark and the Howse sisters. An angry white mob picked up Major, his brother, Maggie, and Alma and threw them in jail. To extract a confession from Major, the authorities slowly tortured him until he admitted that he had killed Johnson. The mob took the 4 blacks out of the jail, placed them in an automobile, and headed to the site where they were to be lynched. Ropes were placed around the necks of the 4, and the other end was tied to the girder of a bridge, which is now known as the Hanging Bridge. Maggie Howse cried, "I ain't guilty of killing the doctor, and you ought not kill me." Someone took a monkey wrench and struck her in the mouth with it, knocking out her teeth. She was also hit across the head with the same wrench, which caused a deep gash in her head. While the other 3 blacks were killed instantly, Maggie Howse, 4 months pregnant, managed to grab the side of the bridge to break her fall. She did this twice before she fell to her death, and the mob joked about how difficult it was to kill her. No one stepped forward to claim the bodies. No one held funeral services for the victims. The black community demanded that the whites cut them down and bury them. They were all placed in unmarked graves. Alma was on the verge of giving birth when the whites killed her. One witness claimed that at her burial the following day, the movements of her unborn child could be detected. Johnson's parents felt that the blacks that had been killed had nothing to do with their son's death, but believed that some irate white man had killed him, knowing that the blame would fall on the blacks' shoulders. Walter White, who was the NAACP secretary at the time, visited the scene of the execution and filed a report. He demanded that Governor Bilbo of Mississippi look into the lynchings and investigate it. Bilbo told the NAACP to go to hell. Black women often died with their babies in their arms and alongside their husbands and older children. Between 1886 and 1957, there were 159 black women lynched in America. Lynching may be the most inhumane form of vigilante justice and still continues this day in various physical, mental, economical, and social forms. Until next time, if you like little known history facts as I do, please like, share, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Press the bell to be notified of future uploads. Thank you for watching.